Thank you for joining us for Open Line tonight. We are talking about criminal justice reform. Our guest is Josh Smith with Fourth Purpose, once a convicted criminal, now fighting for those who have been convicted for a better life in the future. Did I sum that up pretty good, Josh? Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Good. We're going to take it from there. I do want to invite our viewers tonight to call in with questions they may have on this. It can be a pretty divisive issue, and one that if people have not been directly impacted by our criminal justice system may not understand all that goes into it. But I do want to talk, as we were talking about before the break, incentives, because the bill making its way through the Tennessee legislature right now will do away with incentives for prisoners when it comes to good time behavior. So let's start there. And could you explain that to people? What is it?
Sure. So they're incentivized two ways. Okay. They get sentencing credits for two things. One, behavior. Okay. So if they get infractions, if they do assaults, if they do other rule violations inside of TDOC, then they lose those behavior credits, which equals days. Okay, so we're talking about a serious thing. It costs you if you do something wrong, right? And it incentivizes you if you don't. The second one is participation. This is for education programs. This is for schooling. This is for your job in prison. And so it incentivizes those to be able to, hey, I want to show that I'm programming and I want to get those credits for it. People ask me all the time, they're like, well, aren't people in there doing some of this that they don't really, want to do it, or they're just doing it to get the time? Yes. The answer is yes. But guess what? They end up getting to hear and get exposed to things that they otherwise wouldn't have. If they're listening to victim impact programming, they have to hear the pain they cause victims. That's important for us. We, as society, we want them to hear that. If they're in anger management, or if they're in these faith-based services that are done, or the school program and education, these are all things that we want them, whatever their motivation begins at, to be able to participate in. It's a big tool for TDOC that they're able to use. And I'm going to tell you, the environment is much different when you don't have those tools.
And now this bill would necessarily wipe out those programs from our prisons, but it would change what the incentive is. Prisons could still give other incentives for doing these programs, but it would not take time off your sentence. How critical is that?
Yeah, what incentives are they going to give? I mean, people go, I've heard some of the legislators saying they can still give incentives. These same legislators aren't inside the prisons to even know what we're talking about or what incentives they can give. So I'd love to hear, what are those incentives that's going to keep somebody from assaulting staff or assaulting each other? I know it was the Burl Cain down in Angola prison in Louisiana, noted as one of the most dangerous things. And he said, I can't be hard enough on them for them to stop hurting my staff or each other. It doesn't work. So we have to find other ways to be able to incentivize them to be able to see a difference. So, I mean, I don't know what incentives they can give that makes a difference. But what happens in this environment, unfortunately, all the work that Tennessee has done over the last 8 years, from Governor Haslam to Governor Lee, we have built, and new recidivism numbers keep coming out, and they're trending down. Each time a number comes out, not once, in the last 8 years has it trended up. This right here totally changes that. Matter of fact, you can take and remove a lot of the programming that's happening because they won't go. Someone said to me, a legislator asked me, said, well, sure, they'll still go. And I said, well, if they knew that they needed to go to programming, why are they in prison? Wouldn't they have done that on the streets if they knew they could do it? That's not the case. We need to incentivize them to do whatever we can for them to take a look at themselves and improve themselves.
Is there proof that these programs work, though, once people get out?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you can't show me, and I made somebody a challenge. You can't show me one program, a programmatic class, structure class, not one in the entire country that has increased recidivism. Now think about that. Not one class can somebody go through. If they go through a Men of Valor class and transition out in the streets into Men of Valor's program, I think their recidivism rate's 13%. Okay, there's any program, Focus Ministries is another one. There's not one that somebody goes through that somehow now it's a higher recidivism rate. If you invest in people, it has been shown over and over and over again that it reduces recidivism and makes improvements in public safety. period, hands down.
Something interesting about this bill that might be a tough sell for Republicans. Republicans usually like to talk about being fiscally conservative. This bill will cost the state quite substantially, about $40 million. That's the fiscal note on it.
You're going to get me started. It's not 40 million. Okay. That's not even the number that was, well, I don't know how this works, but let me just tell you, we learned, if you watched a couple weeks ago, TDOC sent in a number of over 90 million. The number now is 40 million. Now, I don't know enough about how Nashville and the legislation, all that works, but that's interesting math. Okay. I would even argue that the collateral consequences of this are much more. We're not even looking at the consequences on the outside of this, families, the cost to the state, or the burden of the state. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, as a conservative, what are we doing now? The response to that is we'll pay whatever it's necessary to keep society safe. And I agree with that. Let's write the check every time we can, but show me one thing that this fixes. That's what I'd like to see. Show me where there's an example of, I mean, in these other states, we've got great examples of people getting out on bail too early, coming back and hurting people and all that. Show me the examples of what we're fixing here. Where are the examples of all these violations because somebody didn't do enough time in prison? That's not the case in Tennessee. Tennessee is a tough on crime state. It has never been light on crime. In 1980, 5,000 people were incarcerated in this state. Right before COVID, 30,000. The cost of corrections has doubled, I think, since 2014. Yet, guess what? The crime rate has not changed. Even including if you go back to 1980, we're still looking at relatively the simple crime rate, yet we're spending more time, more people in prison, spending more money. And I'm all for spending money. I would just say, with my experience, which is a lot more than what most people have that are looking at these bills and things, we will do better. You want to save money, let's invest money in more programming. Let's really kill these people as they come into prison with kindness. Let's kill them with positive stuff and force them to see that. Force them to take victim impact program statements and get them involved in other ways to be able to say, all right, I need to fix myself. This isn't it. I mean, I know we're looking for fixes. You know, I was just on Shelby County down in Memphis, and I'm so shocked that so many are saying this is good, because I'm looking at, but you know what? They're dealing with a lot of crime. They're dealing with all these challenges, and I get it. We're looking for fixes, but this isn't it. It is just not it.
Well, like you said, perhaps it's short-sighted, because people do, when they hear about crime, when it's in their neighborhood and there doesn't seem to be immediate fix, the answer always goes to lock them up and throw away the key. It's not how our criminal justice system can function, though. It's not how our budgets can function. It's expensive to keep people in prison.
It is expensive. And, you know, I'll tell you, Shelby County has done such a great job. They did a crime commission a few years back. And, you know, it shocks people. It shocked me when I was on the task force. You know, in our entire state, if I asked you where the highest recidivism rate was, most of us would all say Shelby County, right? We would say, wow, that's the most crime. Guess what? It's the lowest of all the major cities in our state. Now, ask yourselves why. I'll tell you it's why. They put a crime commission together. They started looking at how to invest in ways to impact these offenders. And guess what? Programming inside and programming being with the continuity of when they get outside. You've got programs like Hope Works down there, and people really investing in people. And guess what? Shocking, it's working. It's decreasing the recidivism rate, while in other areas it's going higher, all because there's less programs and less investment.
And I think that you can bring an interesting perspective to this, because you spent time in federal prison, and up until just recently, under some measures that President Trump passed, when you got sentenced federally, that is the time you served. There was no good time behavior. There's no parole, probation, right, whatever. It is that time. So when you were locked up, what was the mentality?
I mean, you talk about hopeless. I mean, we call it in prison, you call it laying down, okay? When you have nothing to gain, nothing coming, you just lay down. There's no programming. I mean, you had a GED programming, and every once in a while you'd have programs for volunteers. Really what changed me, the biggest impact on me, were the other people. I just happened to get exposed to these CEOs, these educated people, and that got me motivated, saying, okay, wait a minute, I can be like them. But guess what? If I was locked up in the state of Tennessee, you would never be meeting a Josh Smith. You would definitely not be meeting a millionaire Josh Smith. You'd be meeting maybe on the news or something, doing something bad. This, again, the more incentive we can give somebody, the better. In federal prison, we see it. And now you see it changing. They see it's a broken system and they're working to change it. And by the way, changed by President Trump. I mean, conservatives getting together saying, hey, here's the solution. And now, and I say my fellow conservatives, they just don't understand. It's not, somebody asked me, man, you're going against conservatives. Look, I'm proud to live in this state, very proud. People don't get to hear that enough. But this is a fix to a problem that doesn't exist. We cannot do it this way. And this is going to have consequences that are going to have to be paid down the road if this is passed.
Okay, we have to take another quick break. I would love to bring in some of your questions or comments, perspective. Go ahead and give us a call, 615-737-PLUS.